Welcome to Caleb Can't Read. I'm Jordan Rabel.
I'm Caleb Terrence.
I've noticed you've got a mustache coming in, actually.
Yeah, I got a little stash.
Mustache Bob is coming back.
Oh, for a little bit, yeah.
For a little bit? He's not here to stay.
I mean,
He's
probably
couch
not.
surfing for how long?
I mean, eventually someone will start laughing while I'm having sex with them because it looks very silly, and then I will be ashamed and shave it. But until then, no.
I just need to remind you, you are
here.
not on your best behavior when you have a mustache grown for some reason.
I know.
There's literally psychological studies of like people wearing sunglasses.
Oh shit! It's not just me.
No. People wearing sunglasses and like being more of an asshole.
Okay.
And for some reason, for you, it just happens to be whenever you grow a mustache.
In order to pull off the mustache, you have to be more assertive. Otherwise, you just look like a fucking jackass with the mustache. Like you have to be more of a dick with a mustache.
You need to be more assertive.
Yeah.
That's what you got out of that. All the molesters in the world that have the creepy mustaches.
You didn't say more people molest when they wear sunglasses, you fucking asshole.
No,
that's not what you were like.
People with mustaches do.
Why didn't you just say that instead of using a weird sunglass metaphor?
Because instead you're just like, you got to be more aggressive when you have a mustache. It's like, no, I don't think they do. I think that's very dangerous advice.
Well, you just, look. All I'm saying, all I'm trying to say with my non-weird molester thinking head, Jordan, is when you have a mustache, if you do not look like you know what you were doing, you look like an absolute fucking jackass. But if you pull it off right, it looks cooler.
No.
It do.
Well, let's get started, shall we?
Yeah, sure. Nice fucking...
Okay,
really.
You know what? Hey, I came up with the segue, but your mustache was more interesting.
You have put such little...
Hey,
No.
I got one. I thought about while I was taking a shit at work today. All right? You want to hear it?
Yeah, I guess.
Do you find it to be... No, wait, let me start over. Okay.
Fuck.
Would you prefer somebody who, let's say an artist of any kind, musician, painter, writer, whatever, would you say that you would prefer if they have more good ideas released early before they have the things like thought to perfection, or would you wait for them to hone their craft for a single project? Like take Cormac McCarthy, who you and I both know and love. The guy releases like a novel a decade, on average. Mm-hmm. And I would love to read more Cormac McCarthy, but there isn't anymore, not until later this year when he releases a couple others. But like, if he were to release more books, then they would be less honed, more than likely. Right.
Yeah.
So what would you prefer though?
Definitely more honed.
You think? Okay.
100%.
Well, there's my segue.
Okay. Wow. Holy shit.
Yeah. That was a full
Jordan,
thought.
Wow. Fucking Christ, I've only been badgering you about writing some shit for that for like an entire year. Longer than a year. How long have we been doing this?
Well, we're almost to our 50th episode.
Wow. Yeah, 50th episode.
Well, let me tell you
lazy piece
about
of shit.
Roberto Bolano Avalos was born April 28th, 1953 in Santiago, Chile. His father, Leon Avalos, was a truck driver and occasional boxer, and his mother, Victoria Avalos, was a school teacher. Growing up, Roberto always had his nose in a book, regardless of his dyslexia. He was also skinny as hell, and due to his nearsightedness, was never without his big nerd glasses. He was the poster child of what a geek looked like, and between this and his family being painfully lower class, Roberto was frequently bullied. But just getting picked on at school wouldn't be enough to make Roberto's life hard. No, he had his first job at just 10 years old, selling bus tickets on the route going between the town of Quilpia, where he lived, and Valparaiso, the birthplace of future dictator Augusto Pinochet. By the time he was 15 in 1968, Roberto Avalos and his family moved to Mexico City. Unfortunately, this was around the same time that Mexico was undergoing a bit of a cultural revolution. You see, Mexico City had been chosen to host the 1968 Olympics, and the same corrupt shit was happening there that always happens to a city chosen to host the Olympics. Do you know about this kind of thing? Like when a city is taken over for the Olympic by the Olympic Committee and everything? Basically, there's a lot of like...
Yeah, don't they like hustle a lot of people out of the area? And
yeah,
then,
including ma and pa shops and everything. So that, yeah. Typically, that's when the city, after the Olympics leave, that's typically when a city or country goes into economic collapse. It actually happened with Greece in 2004, I believe it was. Yeah.
Nice.
So, yeah. Cool.
Yeah, I'll host it. Yeah, fuck my whole regime.
Well, the rich get richer, and that's okay. So, they don't give a fuck about us.
It's a continuing theme.
Yeah, it's weird. Well, the city had been undergoing a number of protests by this time, usually hosted by university students that were just a few years older than Roberto. However, the Alvarez family moved to Mexico City during a particularly bad clash with the police. It actually has a name and its own Wikipedia page, and it's called the Tlatelolco Massacre. Thousands of people were in the streets protesting in the Tlatelolco district on the city of the city on October 2nd, 1968, giving speeches and doing marches, when suddenly they were met with an army of cops. Around 5,000 soldiers and 200 small tanks surrounded the actual plaza where the crowd was gathered, which I find odd if they were hoping to disperse the crowd since they gave them nowhere to run.
That's not how that works.
They're there to arrest as many as possible, right?
No. Well, I have a feeling that in this scenario they didn't even have to lie about it, so... Yeah, I mean...
Man, you're really good at this.
Weird.
Now, at around 6:15 at night, flares were shot out over the crowd, and the police started opening fire on the protesters. They even had machine guns set up in the windows of the apartment building across the street from the plaza. And when people started scattering past the crowds of police, they hunted them down house by house in various streets, just pulling out whoever they wanted from their homes and arresting them. At the end of the night, although the initial tally was 44 dead, it would turn out that the number was closer to 400. Besides the people being gunned down by the police, 1,000 people were arrested. And of course, you would have to assume a lot of these people pulled from their homes were innocent as well. Like, they had nothing to do with it because they just didn't care. The police were angry. I highly recommend people to look into the timeline of events for this, because the atrocities didn't really stop there. And it turns out that all over the world, if you're a cop, you're a cop. And for years, and I'm talking decades, it was believed that some protester, one guy fucking somewhere, had started a fight with the police that eventually spread and all hell broke loose. But when the official police records of the event went public in the year 2000, turns out the cops had brought snipers with them specifically to pick off students. So yeah, the protesters didn't start shit. Oh, and of course the weapons...
It doesn't really matter if they did.
Yeah, they're still... did they have a big reform? No.
No. If you have those numbers and then, like, you're armed and everything, it doesn't really matter who starts it. It doesn't give you a fucking, like, green light.
No, they were going to do this regardless. I'm pretty sure everyone was very surprised when this report came out.
It honestly doesn't matter if they all were, like, there with bats and then charging the police. You don't get to massacre and then rip people out of their homes.
Turns out it doesn't matter if they were literal children either.
Yeah, no, that's not...
Oh, and
relevant.
Of course, also the weapons and ammunition used by the Mexican militia were supplied by the CIA. So go figure. Anyway, themes. Roberto Avalos saw what was happening
in Latin America.
Hang on, let me. Yeah,
weird.
Roberto Avalos saw what was happening with this totalitarian state. The Mexican government had clearly ceased to give any fucks about hiding who they truly were. And like I said, the kids that were killed were just a little older than Roberto. They were college age. Shit, I'm sure some there were victims that were younger than him as well, for sure. And Roberto probably wondered how long it was going to be before his school was nationalized and taught whatever the government felt was within his parameters to learn anyway. Or worse yet, what the newspapers would be allowed to show. So... Roberto figured this would be the right time to drop out of school altogether. What?
What are you going to teach us? I don't know. I didn't think we'd get this far. Get to work.
So Roberto figured this would be the right time to drop out of school altogether and get a job as a freelance journalist, to at least try and show things as they really happened before the government could twist the truth. To study the fine art of writing, Roberto would choose to learn from the greats. He'd stay locked away inside his local library for several hours of the day. And some books, the ones he really admired, he stole. And he saw the very real revolutions happening all throughout Latin and South America at this point in time, both the physical and cultural. And he wanted nothing more than to document it, to be a part of the coming revolution, wherever that may be. So he started working on small, left-wing magazines, becoming a participant in many of their activities. And, like some authors do, Roberto decided to create his professional name by just dropping his last name. So instead of Roberto Avalos, the world would forever know him by his first and middle name only, as Roberto Bolano. Now, I don't know how active Roberto Bolano was during this time. We actually don't have a lot of surviving records of his early life. But I mean, go figure. He was basically writing articles for student magazines that one rarely bothered to keep.
I mean, it's probably lucky for him we don't have that. So.
Probably some really embarrassing shit in there, I'm sure.
Totally.
God, I remember somebody accidentally seeing like my writings that I was making in high school.
I remember you actually handed me a lot of your writing, and I hated it.
It wasn't a lot.
And you should feel embarrassed.
I gave you one script.
Yeah.
That was a lot of pages for you, huh?
Jesus, how old were you at that time? Was it like excusable or no?
Fuck you.
Damn.
Yeah, I remember like somebody accidentally
Fuck, you're like 30 right now, and this is your writing.
You know what? Fuck you. Fuck yourself. You mustachioed pervert. Anyway, so... Somebody read it and I was like, oh, that's just, that's, you know, I was trying to pass it off like it wasn't mine. And they were like, well, whoever it is, it sure seems like they read a lot of Chuck Palahniuk. And I was like, yeah.
I understand that joke.
The guy who wrote Fight Club.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, very influential to like 15-year-old me, of course.
Oh, God.
But as much as Roberto thought
you were white.
I was.
But you're still white.
I'm still white.
But you were white in 15.
As much as Roberto thought he wanted to see the front lines of revolution, he would soon regret that decision in 1973. When Roberto was 20 years old, he went to his home country of Chile to cover the rising political unrest. You see, Bolano wanted to, quote, help build the revolution in Chile by supporting the first democratically elected Marxist president in Latin America, Salvador Allende. He had already quashed a couple of different coup attempts, and at this point, it was thought to be a losing battle for anyone who opposed him. Now, the United States, who quite famously hates commies, didn't like that. So they helped create a military coup led by the Chilean military general Augusto Pinochet. On September 11th, 1973, Pinochet's army, fully armed to the teeth, thanks to the CIA, surrounded President Allende's palace, where he gave his last speech over the radio to his people, promising that he would not resign. You can actually hear the gunfire in the background during his speech. Well, unsurprisingly, Allende ended up dead in an apparent suicide while his palace was being overrun. And yes, suspicious as it was, an independent team of forensic specialists did determine in 2011 that it actually was self-inflicted. And I mean, Allende was talking about himself in the past tense during his speech, shit like that.
I mean, that doesn't make it better.
No, but I think...
Like, if he was so stressed that he shot himself, that's not like, oh, well, he did it goddamn self.
Well,
like,
I think what he was hoping people would believe he died during a gunfight or something, but, he just wanted them to carry on his revolution, and he actually shot himself with the AK-47 gifted to him by Fidel Castro, which is kind of neat. But as shitty as...
Neat.
I mean, in a certain degree.
Hey, welcome to Caleb Can't Read. Fuck America. Fuck.
What? Since when?
Fuck the whole place. This is what your taxes do. This is why. Yeah. This is why you get that fat cut out of your fucking check that you can barely fucking afford to pay anything with.
My parents' taxes literally help create crack cocaine. In a way, that's kind of neat, But as shitty as this military coup orchestrated by Pinochet was, and as bad as a person as he would turn out to be, I don't want you to think that Allende was a saint or anything. He was actually doing some fantastic work in the beginning. He was making milk a free right for children and mothers, brought literacy to rural areas, and he was building infrastructure for communal subways. But he did a lot of bad shit too. I mean, he took over private mineral deposits on people's land, declaring them for the people, and then plummeted Chilean currency as far down as it could possibly go. I mean, literally worth fractions of a cent. I believe it technically had a negative worth on it. Now, like I said, Pinochet was not any better. In fact, he was far, far worse. Pinochet used his political opponents' daughters for bayonet practice. He started an...
Oh.
Yeah.
You don't need to practice it. It's a bayonet. Just fucking... Jesus Christ.
I think he just wanted the excuse.
I know, but goddamn.
He started an operation across Chile to eliminate every leftist in the country that resulted in the deaths of 40,000 people. Like, literally, it was a line of guys and, like, that just spanned the country and just kept walking up. You know, and they were just like, you a leftist? You know?
You're leftist? Yes. Wait! Ah!
Oh, and yeah, you remember that scene in Scarface where Sosa takes a dude up in a helicopter and it hangs him from the air?
Oh, see.
Do you remember that? Yeah. Pinochet started that. He was actually quite famous for his helicopter deaths. Although most times there was no rope involved, he just plummet people out of the helicopter into the ocean. Yeah, but he was very famous for that. That was his trademark. So although Bolano initially went to Chile to write about the success story that was Allende's presidency, because let's face it, he probably would have skipped over all the bad stuff anyway, what he ended up getting instead was the story of an unfolding dictatorship. And unfortunately, while this would be the best opportunity for a journalist, Roberto was quickly identified as a terrorist of the opposition and sent to jail.
He wasn't shot with a leftist?
No, not... Well,
I mean, clearly he wasn't because we're going on.
Well, that was a later operation that Pinochet had. But at the time, the immediate cleanup had everyone going to like a soccer stadium in the. Well, actually, here famously, leftists were corralled.
Soccer? They banned it?
Huh?
Never mind. Let's go.
Yeah, actually, yes. Fuck. I wonder if Christopher Nolan thought about that while he was doing this.
Probably not.
Well, leftists were corralled into the local soccer stadium, tortured in the locker rooms, and then taken out to the field for a bullet in the head. However, rather than spending months, maybe years, before going to the Gulag, Roberto was released from imprisonment after only 8 days. Why? Because the 2 prison guards that came to torture him had been old classmates of his. And while he was never tortured, Roberto did say that he could hear it coming from right down the hall. He said, quote, "In the small hours, I could hear them torturing others. I couldn't sleep, and there was nothing to read except a magazine in English that somebody had left behind." Poor guy. Now, some people have actually raised doubts about whether or not Bolano was even in Chile in 1973. And honestly, I don't know. On one hand, knowing the kind of
This is questionable as to whether or not he's...
Yeah, because here's the thing. Knowing the kind of self-important guy that Roberto Bolano would become, I wouldn't be surprised if he did make it up to be part of something important. And the thing is, he didn't even write about his experience as a prisoner in Chile until he turned it into a short story much, much later on, which is pretty suspect.
I mean, do you...
Well,
you don't think that maybe it would be more dangerous for him to publish or release something like that?
Well, but he goes
like
back to
right when it happened.
Well,
man?
I mean, you go to Mexico. I mean, why wouldn't you write about your experience for one of the several Marxist magazines you work for? You know?
Yeah, I know, but like if you just saw that, like let's say he was there and he saw that. Hang on.
No, fair point.
Let's say he is there. He does see that, and he sees a bunch of leftists being like tortured and then like publicly executed. You don't think he's going to be like, "Hey, why don't we let this chill for a little bit
That's
before
true.
we fucking release this?"
I can't say what his PTSD might be more.
It's not even. No. It's not even. It doesn't even have to be a PTSD
thing. Well, 100% would be. I'm just saying.
I mean, probably yes. I'm just saying that like you're going to see that, and you're going to be like, "Yeah, no, this needs to chill for a minute before I release and start talking about it so that doesn't happen to me."
That's fair. I mean, but I don't know. On the other hand, it doesn't seem outlandish that Bolano would make that trip anyway. And this guy got into so many fights that even if he wasn't jailed for being a terrorist, then it doesn't seem that far-fetched to me that he was at least thrown in the drunk tank. The funny thing is, these were never physical fights with like tough dudes in bars or fighting cops or anything like that. Bolano would get into loud, annoying, very public arguments with other Marxists. Because as any college kid with that one friend knows, you can't just be a communist. You have to be some subgenre of communist. In Bolano's case, he was a Trotskyist which is different from a Marxist and naturally opposed to Stalinists.
Yeah, no, this is really good, because otherwise there would actually be momentum. And we've carried this tradition to this day.
I refuse to find out what any of that means. The point is, Roberto Bolano was a very argumentative guy. Now, maybe you don't believe that Bolano made that trip to Chile in 1973, let's say. But if you do, there's an additional rumor that you can choose to accept. That while traveling on his way back to Mexico City, Roberto Bolano made a stop in El Salvador to interview the local guerrilla fighters. There, he met Salvadorian poet.
Jesus.
What? Oh, it's
double-sided the papers again. God
yeah,
damn.
I know. I told you, man, it's a long one. So there, he supposedly met El Salvadorian poet Roque Dalton, who was fighting with the guerrillas for a little while. And he also met Dalton's friends that would turn out to be his future murderers. Now, so the guy was a guerrilla fighter, and then there was infighting within the guerrilla faction, and they eventually ended up murdering this poet. And, this is one I can confirm is rumor, but not one created by Bolano himself. This rumor was, as we see every so often with famous writers, created by a critic of Bolano's work who wanted to know something about him that no one else did. But Bolano did stay in El Salvador for a short time around 1973, so you could make the argument that it was on his way back home from Chile regardless. But he was a complete tourist while in El Salvador. He didn't do any work there at all. He even returned shortly after his first trip back to take an even longer vacation there. Now, a few years before all of this, in 1970, the president of Mexico, Luis Echeverria, was trying to reclaim Mexico's youth. The last administration was responsible for the Tlatelolco massacre, which the youth deemed very uncool. So President Echeverria tried to win the young vote back by handing out scholarships and prizes to the youth of Mexico who could produce the best writing and poetry the country had to offer in various contests. But of course, that was only on the surface. The prizes were typically given to those that wrote poems of the nationalistic variety. At the end of Echeverria's presidency in 1975, Roberto Bolano would create a resistance movement among a group of friends that specifically tried to put a stop to this style of poetry. In 1975, along with friends Jose Vicente Anaya, Ruben Medina, Jose Rosas Ribeiro, and Mario Papiscaro, Roberto Bolano started a young person's literary movement called infrarealism, or in its native Spanish, infrarealismo. Huh? I've been learning.
Why are you
Was that correct?
Don't ask me about this. Don't ask me about this. Like, it's embarrassing that I don't know this shit. All right, but I fucking don't. All right, look, I was raised by white people. Like, it's not. I got nothing here. I don't speak Spanish. I can't correct you.
See, the initial the initial meeting for this movement took place in a friend's living room and consisted of around 40 students all crammed together. They called themselves infras for short, and lived by the motto coined by 1940s abstract expressionist painter Roberto Mata, quote, "blow the brains out of the establishment," who, by the way, also coined the term infrarealist. And by the way, I looked a little bit into this painter, Roberto Mata, and it looks like he created the first group of infrarealists, but then got kicked out of the group he because he was sleeping with another painter's wife, and that painter shot himself. So since Roberto Mata's death, infrarealism was now being given a rebirth from Bolano and his friends. Now, prior to the infrarealists being an organized group, there's a story that Bolano's friend...
Shoot him, not yourself. Wow.
Well, it turned out that was actually not the reason why, but everyone thought it was, and so, yeah. But anyway, prior to the infrarealists being an organized group, there's a story that Bolano's friend and co-founder Mario Papiscaro and a friend of his did burst into one of these government-funded writers' workshops and tried to oust the teacher out of his own classroom by getting everyone to sign a petition. But in the end, they were roughly thrown out of the class, and it sounds like maybe got their asses kicked. So they were already off to a good start. And the plan for these infrarealists was to just do the exact same thing they did before, just on a much larger scale. Like, now there's not just two people barging into nationalist book readings and writing classes. There were 20 to 40 of them at any given time. And according to Roberto Bolano's later editor, Jorge Heralda, Roberto was actually a feared presence in Mexico City because although he had nothing published of his own at this point outside a few articles, he would burst into readings and literary presentations and challenge authors and teachers to literary debates, which he always won. But as feared as Bolano was specifically, he really only interrupted like 2 or 3 readings himself. But since they were of high-profile authors like Octavio Paz, Bolano was the one infrarealist people recognized. He even interrupted a reading by a famous Mexican author's son, believing that he didn't get to where he was based on his own merit. But the other hipsters in the literature...
Hell yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But the other hipsters in the literature scene in Mexico didn't know that the infrarealists were just targeting people that painted their government in a favorable light. They thought that they were just random douchebags that might burst in and kick their ass over nothing, like some sort of gang.
Weird. They just thought the anti-fascists were like weird boogeymen or something.
Is Antifa in the room here with you now? And although articles started appearing in 1 or 2 magazines trying to get...
You're full of shit. Oh my God, they're eating babies!
Although there were a few articles appearing in 1 or 2 magazines trying to get the infrarealists to stop, they did gain some notoriety, and more people ended up joining. One of which was a Russian revolutionist Trotsky's great-granddaughter, whom Bolano highly admired. Remember, he's not just a communist, he's a Trotskyist. And they became very close friends.
All right. That's fun.
He's going to become more insufferable.
But did you read the literature?
No. Did you feel the literature?
No, I've been working 60 hours a week. Please help. I did not have time to read the literature.
We're in a dictatorship. Why does this matter?
Please stop asking me about the literature. I do not have time for this. Are you going to give me a gun or not? Let's go.
I drew you a gun. No! So the people saw that the
I'll have you know I called that man out in public. Thanks, dick.
He was a nerd. I was going to kick his ass anyway. So the people saw that the infrarealists weren't going away, right? So they were like, okay, fine then. Put your money where your mouth is. Show us good poetry. But no magazine would print them except a magazine called Plural, which figured having these young upstarts print their shit would make good sales. But there was an issue with that. Octavio Paz, one of the poets Roberto Bolano personally protested during a reading, was an editor at Plural, and he would do whatever he had to stop any infrarealist from getting published. And honestly, Octavio Paz sounds like he was kind of a bit of an ass anyway, and the higher-ups at Plural were just getting sick of his shit regardless. So rather than side with him, Plural used this as an excuse to fire Octavio from the magazine, and the infrarealist poetry was printed next issue. And you know what? They did good. You have to understand, these kids weren't just mad about the nationalism getting printed in papers. They were mad about the art of poetry getting bastardized by the government. And with these poems printed in Plural magazine, people finally understood what they were bitching about. Your art is going to be shit if it has government oversight. Now, with this notoriety, Bolano did write a 20-page poetry pamphlet called Reinventing Love in 1976, which would be his last published work until his first novel in 1993, almost 20 years later. With the small sales of Reinventing Love, Bolano planned to move away from Mexico. Because, you see, the amount of hatred the infrarealists were getting caused Bolano's American girlfriend Lisa Johnson to break up with him, and he admitted that he partly wanted to leave Mexico because of it.
Wait. Leave Mexico to go to America?
No, just to go away from Mexico.
To go further away from
Mexico.
From Mexico and America.
Because of his girlfriend.
Because of the lady. Okay.
He is a poet.
Just tell her to go back to America.
Just tell her to go back where she came from.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the problem?
Get out of here.
In 1977, when Bolano was around 24 years old, he decided to move to Europe of all places, but without any real plan. His mom had moved to Barcelona sometime in the mid-1970s, so this is where Bolano figured he could stay until he got up on his feet. Instead, he traveled a bit with his friend and fellow infrarealist Mario Papaschiaro, who stayed with Roberto until he found a place to stay. Eventually, he decided to settle down in the coastal town of Blanes, Spain, where he would live for the remainder of his life. His friend Papiscaro went back to Mexico City, where he'd carry on the infrarealism movement until his death in 1998. But even with infrarealism mainly gone by the time Bolano had left Mexico, it became kind of a tradition to fuck over Octavio Paz's future readings anyway.
Wait, what did Homeboy die of?
Old age, I think.
Oh, really?
Or cancer.
Oh, not helicopter or something?
No. That's Chile. They're in Mexico.
Oh, okay.
So,
okay.
I mean, if anything, cartels or cops.
I mean, a helicopter could get there pretty quick. I mean,
That's true. I mean, why waste all the fucking gas and time it takes to go up and down real quick?
I was just curious, like with the buildup we had towards this, I didn't think it was going to be. What did he die of? Time.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't think.
Lifelong smoker. Now, between him settling down in Blanes and the few interviews that he was given, we actually know very little about Roberto Bolano's personal life. He dabbled in writing fiction, creating entire novels, but deciding not to release them. The first book he ever wrote was called Antwerp in 1980. It's a very short book, only about 120 pages long, but composed of 56 vignettes that tied together to create one story, though the story itself is still very loose. Like, there are recurring characters and scenes, but largely the book's plot is kind of up to you. In the end, however, Antwerp wasn't something that Bolano chose to publish because, as he said, quote, "I wrote this book for myself, and even that I can't be sure of." The second book he wrote, written between 1981 and 82, was titled The Path of the Elephants. The book is about a physician hired to help the real-life poet Cesar Vallejo while he dies from unstoppable hiccups in 1938. Not what he really died from, by the way.
Does it say what they were induced by, at least?
No. But two mysterious...
None of this is very interesting.
Two mysterious men bribed the physician not to help Cesar Vallejo. And by the end of the book, while the physician goes down a path of uncertainties, he and the reader get lost in his head and no questions to the mysteries are actually answered. It's kind of like a neat surrealist style book, but to me, it's evident that this was probably just Bolano finding his footing in what would become his signature style.
It's just really, I mean, you're really bummed. We started out really strong and really exciting, and then his girlfriend... shh. And his girlfriend broke up with him, and now he's been crying in Spain. All right, I'm really bummed out. We lost a lot of momentum here. And
he's crying in Spanish, too.
That's what?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, no, this
is Duolingo lesson 1. In 1984, Roberto Bolano completed work on another novel called The Spirit of Science Fiction. Now, I won't go into the details of this one because it actually relates quite a bit with a later novel of his, but just to show you how serious Roberto was about his name in the literature world, he again decided not to publish what he deemed was an unworthy novel. Roberto married a woman named Carolina Lopez in 1985 and largely worked whatever job he could to spare the rent. Custodian, garbage man, dishwasher. But in his spare time, he'd work on his poetry. But they were okay with this beatnik lifestyle, barely earning enough income for the things he and Carolina needed. However, when Bolano was 37 in 1990, he had a son named Lautaro. And all of a sudden, Roberto's reality kicked in, where he realized he has a family to take care of now. And having never published anything besides that one...
should have got a union job. Fuck.
Oh no, I live in a socialist country. I only get 6 months paid off once I have a kid. Oh no. Well, having never published anything besides that one pamphlet in 1976, and knowing that poets make nothing compared to novelists, he changed his career into just that, a novelist. Now, at this point, he'd actually published a book already in 1984, a collaboration with a Spanish author named A.G. Porta, called Advice from a Morrison Disciple to a Joyce Fanatic, if that gives you any idea of how pretentious these guys are. But the book was mainly for fun, hasn't been translated by anyone, and the world generally agrees that it probably wasn't written for anything but a joke for him and some friends.
I thought you said he was getting all serious because he had a family.
That was back in 1984. But to start his true literary career, Roberto Bolano released a short, less than 200-page novel called The Skating Rink in 1993, released by publisher Alcala de Henares. The story is about a young ice skating Olympian named Nuria Marti, who, after being dropped from the Olympic team, is stalked by a rich man named Enric, who builds her own skating rink within the confines of his own decrepit mansion.
Ew, no.
Yeah. As what will be true Bolano style, the story
And you want nothing in return. Correct.
Absolutely nothing. I'm just keep dancing by this mirror. As what will be true Bolano style, the story has multiple narrators, one of them being the rich man Enric himself, as he explains why he commits a murder at the skate rink. And that's really all I know about it. Apparently a pretty good novel, but ultimately downplayed by everything else he'd go on to do. But I did find it interesting that one narrator is Mexican, another is a Spaniard, and one is a Chilean, which are the three main places that Bolano lived his life. And apparently his obsession with multiple narrators in his novels are because he's always been a fan of detective stories. While it's not like every book he writes has to deal with murder, he does say that, quote, "There's no better literary reward than to have a murderer or a missing person to chase." And that does end up being a trend with his plots. So anyway, the initial sales for the skating rink were slow. I mean, he is a new writer, so it makes sense. In 1994, he decided to release some old poems of his, which, with each new edition, slowly added more poems with every re-release until 1998. The book was titled The Romantic Dogs, and mostly deals with Bolano's memories of Mexico.
This fucking dude's later shit is boring. The titles are boring.
I would say an author's author, but really he's pretentious.
If I'm browsing through and it's the romantic fucking dog horse shit, I'm like, no, not that one. No,
yes.
no.
And while the work is nostalgic, it has a somewhat violent air to it. Kind of the way he looked, like you might look back at old Portland, you know, like, it was really criminal laden and stuff, but it's just a bit of nostalgia.
Portland was fine. Y'all are weak. It's not even bad now. Y'all didn't even know what bad is. You have no idea.
Compared to growing up in Georgia, no, it was bad for Portland.
Georgia, Florida,
I know.
Fuck, dude. No, it's fine. You are fine. Occasionally, there's an insane screaming guy. Sometimes your car windows get broken. Don't leave anything in your car.
I gotta take my banjo out. And remember, these poems were made from when he was like in his mid-20s, so that teenage angst is still burning off, but it leads to beautiful descriptions like, quote, "brief as the sigh of a guillotined head." Beautiful. Now remember, Bolano did... What? Now remember, Bolano did write a book back in 82 called The Path of the Elephants, the one about the doctor trying to cure that one guy's hiccups. Well, in 1994, he decided to release it with the new title Monsieur Pain, after the main character. It's an extremely short novel at 136 pages and ultimately thought to be too experimental for the time. Even if he published this novel back when he wrote it in 1982, I think it probably came out about a decade too late. Now, his career was still very slow to start at this point. Although he'd already published 2 novels and 1 book of poetry now, the book of poetry was all old shit, as was one of his novels. The book that got him the most attention thus far was a newly written novel. So to balance the scales a bit, Roberto came out with a book of newly written poems in 1995 called The Last Savage. Maybe he was a poet after all. Maybe he could make a living as a poet if the book does well. It didn't do well. This was the final proof Roberto Bolano needed to cement himself as a novelist. Bolano would actually write like a madman for the rest of his life, at the rate of almost a book to 2 books a year, so I won't go into in-depth for everything. In 1996, Bolano released a book from publishing house Seis Barrel called Nazi Literature in the Americas. And while technically a novel, the book acts closer to an encyclopedia. It consists of several different Nazi writers. All of them are fictional. And as you read about each of these guys, you see that some of their lives intersect. So the book as a whole does cover a bit of plot. But the last section of the book is not an encyclopedic entry like the rest, but rather a random narrative from a character named Arturo Bolano. This part is told in less than 20 pages, but ultimately would be expanded into Roberto Bolano's next novel. Now, this Arturo Bolano would be the introduction of Bolano's much-used alter ego. Like Henry Chinaski was for Charles Bukowski or Henry Lightcap was to Edward Abbey, Arturo Bolano would be the stand-in to Roberto Bolano for the rest of his career. And what's funny about Nazi literature in the Americas is that there are some characters in the book based on real people. People like American, yeah, well, not Nazis though. People like American writer Allen Ginsberg or Cuban writer Jose Lezama Lima. And the thing is, neither of those people are Nazis. They're just not as far left as.
Thought it would be a zany twist.
No, they're not as far left as he is. So anyone literally to the right of communism is a fucking Nazi.
Well, yeah. Wait, no.
Are you sure?
Jordan, we're going to need to have a little talk in your garage later.
I wanted you to just check out this cool helicopter license I just got.
Sick, right?
Yeah, it kind of tells you what kind of a tanky he was. But for the first time in his career, the book was a huge success, and Bolano got compared to the likes of Jorge Luis Borges, who is the quintessential Latin American writer. We'll get into his episode someday. But when word of mouth got around for how great Nazi literature in the Americas was, there were people who picked it up without knowing much about it and thought it was a real encyclopedia. And I'm going to read you this little section here because I have heard this snippet.
Of course it's real. It has it in the name. Why would it say encyclopedia if it wasn't? What the fuck?
Why would they call it the totally true non-lying tale? I'm going to share this section because I have heard this.
They can't just publish that. It's illegal.
I have heard this part as fact, and I had no idea it came from this book. Quote, the novel comprised 14 chapters. The first began, Lucia was a black woman from. The second, only after serving her father. The third, nothing had come easily for Juan. The fourth, gradually, tenderly, she drew him towards her. The censor quickly smelled a rat. The first letters of each chapter made up the acrostic, Long Live Hitler. Like, if you took the first letter of each chapter in the entire book, it spelled out Long Live Hitler. A major scandal broke out. Perez Mason defended himself haughtily. It was a simple coincidence. The censors set to work in earnest and made a fresh discovery. The first letter of each chapter's second paragraph made up another acrostic, This place sucks. And I have actually seen that like on Today I Learns on fucking Reddit and shit, which is why I thought that this was a real thing. So anyway, like I mentioned before, the final chapter of Nazi literature in the Americas became Roberto's next novel. In 1996, by publishing house Anagrama, who he'd stay with for the rest of his career, Distant Star was released. The book had this as its introduction. Quote, in the final chapter of my novel Nazi Literature in the Americas, I recounted, in less than 20 pages and perhaps too schematically, the story of Lieutenant Ramirez Hoffman of the Chilean Air Force, which I heard from a fellow Chilean, Arturo B. He was not satisfied with my version, so we took that final chapter and shut ourselves up for a month and a half in my house in Blanes, where, guided by his dreams and nightmares, we composed the present novel. So at this point, it looks to me like he is pretending that Arturo Bolano is a real person. And whether Roberto fessed up early on or people just figured out that Arturo coincidentally had the same history as Roberto and is therefore the same person, I don't know. Now, Distant Star is about a man named Alberto Ruiz Tagle, though the book itself is narrated by Arturo Bolano, a man who claims to have witnessed everything in this man's story. According to this unofficial biography, Alberto Ruiz Tagle used Pinochet's 1973 military coup in Chile as a way to get close to those in power, mainly to start a pro-nationalist style of writing that takes on multiple medias. I'm not talking about just painting and writing. I mean creating art through torture, murder, and even skywriting pro-military slogans above internment camps.
Oh.
You know, while doing that kind of thing.
You can't even look to the sky.
You know, while doing the research for this episode, I found that our Roberto Bolano novels are typically less than 200 pages, and I'm kind of thinking about putting a bunch of his books on my reading list because they kind of sound interesting as fuck. Anyway, in 1997, Bolano released...
Jesus Christ, Jordan, you got to stop double-siding these pages, man.
I asked Nicole to do it, and that's why it's like this. It's because I asked a woman to do this.
I don't care.
That's why.
I don't care why it happened. Just make it stop happening. You give me false hope.
I gotta yell at her more. So anyway, in 1997, Bolano released a collection of short stories called Last Evenings on Earth. In it is a story called Dance Card, which is where he first mentions being captured by the Chilean government and being let go by his 2 former friends. Again, waited 24 years to talk about it. In 1998, Roberto Bolano released what some would consider his magnum opus, The Savage Detectives. And this is where he really cements his style with multiple narrators and not a lot happening as far as plot goes. It's very slice of life, and the story itself is actually a fictionalized history of the infrarealists, now calling themselves the visceral realists. It also tells the history of its founders, Arturo Bolano, which is of course Roberto Bolano, and Ulises Lima, which is a stand-in for his friend Mario Papascaro.
Is that the dead dude?
Yeah.
Okay.
But although at this, actually, shit, you're right. Yeah, he would go on to die this year that the book is released, but he, I believe, lived to see it come out.
And you got your time all fucked up. You fucked with time.
No. I just went on to mention where he went with the rest of his life, and then just went back to where we were.
Why would you mention the end of his life before we're done with his life?
Man, I'm sorry, man.
You fucked with time.
Memento really fucked you up.
You don't fuck with time, Jordan.
You had a hard time watching that movie, didn't you?
I'm having a hard time with your reading, though.
Right,
apparently, that's a topic that has to be organized by, like, skilled writers. Okay? Because this isn't making any fucking sense to me. Okay?
All right, look. I wrote it very Roberto Bolano like, all right? It was an homage. No. The book is separated into 3 parts. The first part of the book is told through the eyes of Juan Garcia Madero in 1975. He's attending a writing class in Mexico City, part of his college degree, but he has the feeling that his teacher is unqualified to teach. So Juan Garcia asks him, "Hey, do you know what a respeto is?" And the professor can't answer. Immediately, Juan Garcia knows this man to be a fraud.
What is a respeto?
It doesn't matter. Well, one day...
Do you know what a respeto is? No.
He does describe it in the book, and it doesn't fucking matter. It's a type of poetry or something.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, one day, the professor introduces 2 people who say they're part of a new literary movement called the Visceral Realists, Arturo Bolano and Ulises Lima, and they'd like to sit in on the class. But within half an hour, quote, that's when the battle began. The visceral realists questioned the professor's critical system, and he responded by calling them cut-rate surrealists and fake Marxists. And Juan Garcia stands up and says, "I'm with you, visceral realists. This fraud doesn't even know what a respeto is." And the visceral realists say, "We don't know what that is either, but welcome aboard." And Juan Garcia, thinking he's leading a sort of revolution in the classroom, finds that the rest of his class are actually backing the teacher instead. And rather than fight, Ulises Lima pulls out a poem and reads it before he and Arturo Bolano and Juan Garcia Madero manage to leave. Like some sort of smoke bomb, like literary smoke bomb.
God, I hate these people.
I know. It's great.
Get out of the classroom. God damn it. Leave.
And largely the first part of The Savage Detectives is about these dumbasses.
What's a respeto? We're not going over that today. It doesn't matter. Please, God, just shut the fuck up.
The whole first part is just about these dumbasses bumming around Mexico and just having philosophical discussions about literature. And as pretentious as it, of course, is, it kind of makes sense because they're all like 17 and just talk about philosophy, getting laid, and finding dope. Like the worst thing they end up doing is stealing someone's dad's Impala.
It's not even stealing if it's your dad. It's not like real stealing. You know what I mean?
The second part of the book actually takes place after the third.
Spice it up. Do it from a stranger.
Well, hey, spice it up this way. Second part of the book actually takes place after the third. Huh? How about that?
Cool, look at that. It's
Boom.
in succession, Jordan.
Yeah.
It makes fucking sense, Jordan.
No, because it goes part 1, part 3, and then part 2.
Oh, okay, never mind.
Oh, I'm sorry. You want to be mad at me about that? You can't do simple math.
Yeah.
Fuck you.
Yeah, excuse me.
But regardless, the second part is made up entirely of interviews with a cast of over 40 different characters.
What comes after 2?
Mainly asking about where they ran into the founders of visceral realism from the years of 1976 to 1996. And it's in this way that they become sort of like a myth. They're found in places like Israel and Spain and Chile. And I think the last time we see the founders, Ulises Lima had just finished a stint in a Jerusalem jail, spending his time drawing dwarves with large cocks on the walls. And Arturo Bolano had dueled a Spanish critic in a sword fight and ended up wounded.
Yeah, big dicks are funny. The dwarf thing's weird.
No, because it makes the dick bigger, you know?
Like, by comparison?
I think so, yeah.
How do you know they were dwarves? Maybe he was just really bad at drawing people and, like, you know. But he just put big dicks on them.
Why don't you read it? Find out.
All right, my bad.
Finally, the last part of the Savage Detectives takes place right before the
like
second.
Tolkien dwarves or like lawn gnomes?
Well, that's what I'm wondering, too. Does he just mean short people, or does he mean, like, actual mythical dwarves? I don't know. He didn't mention that part.
I feel like Big Dick Dwarves is more like a like Tolkien dwarves is more like a modern internet thing. So let's go with little people.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, finally, the last part of the Savage Detectives takes place right before the second, as I'd mentioned, in which Ulises Lima, Arturo Bolano, and Juan Garcia Madero have eloped to another part of Mexico with a young prostitute named Lupe. They're on the search for the founder of visceral realism, a woman who calls herself the mother of Mexican poets. She's like a long-forgotten literary god that's been abandoned in some desert town, and her last students of a movement she started decades ago are on the lookout for her. At the same time, the visceral realists are trying to outrun Lupe's pimp, who's traveling the countryside looking for her with the help of his buddy cop.
Man, he must have a lot of money saved up from the other, pimping to be able to just drop everything.
Right? I was wondering that too. Like, maybe that's his one good prostitute. I don't know. Also, I didn't write this in here, but, like, she does mention, she's like, yeah, he's dangerous. He carries a fucking switchblade the length of his cock. And they're like, how do you know it's the length of his cock? And she's like, he measures it every day to make sure that, like,
don't make me explain this. Like,
well, she says he measures it every day to make sure he's still healthy. You know, like, if his cock gets smaller, then, like, something's going wrong. You know, like, did I just recently pick up keto or something? Like, I gotta drop keto.
Fuck, I didn't think of that.
We can't have knives that small, though. I think that's even illegal.
Razor blades.
Yeah, if you break them in half. Now, they do find the mother of Mexican poets, and she manages to tell her story, but she isn't interviewed for very long before the visceral realists are found by Lupe's pimp. Although the pimp and the cop both promise they only want Lupe back and won't hurt anyone, the visceral realists decide to fight back anyway, as does the mother of Mexican poets, who's killed in the ensuing fight. At the end of the book, Ulises Lima and Arturo Bolano say that they'll dump the bodies and the car and meet up with Juan Garcia Madero and Lupe back at a safe house in the fictional city of Santa Teresa. Quote, "Then I watched the Camaro start, hesitantly, and for a while the two cars bumped together through the desert. Then we separated. I headed off in search of the road, and Bolano turned west." The book ends with Juan Garcia and Lupe waiting at the safe house, but, for whatever reason, Arturo Bolano and Ulises Lima never make it there. The book gave Roberto Bolano critical acclaim throughout Latin America, though we figured every good review he had was just some sort of jerk-off who liked hipster writing. He didn't know that his fame was actually growing amongst real critics.
Well, what were you going for, man?
Well, right, you know, like he wanted to write something kind of for himself and his friends almost, but, like, yeah, he figured, like, who the fuck would like this? You know, like, this is pretentious as fuck, which it is. It's an extremely pretentious novel. But, you know, he figured for every good review he got that there's probably, like, a real critic out there that's like, this is stupid, you know? I mean, shit, his work wouldn't even be available in English until after his death. But The Savage Detectives, while mostly about nothing, has incredible writing in it. And that's what ultimately will be what you're remembered for. For some reason, this paragraph in particular really stood out to me. Quote, "They were in the bar of a hotel on Broadway near 81st Street. Everyone together. Lopez Lobo's in-laws, his younger son and his wife, and Lopez Lobo started to cry and said that he loved his two sons and that it was his fault his older son had died. Although maybe he didn't say anything and there was no argument, and all of this only took place in Lopez Lobo's mind. Then Lopez Lobo got drunk and left the boy's ashes in a New York City subway car, and then he went back to Paris without saying anything to anyone." And maybe the story flowed so nicely because Bolano was attached to it in more ways than just being his fictional autobiography.
Like, I never just said he just said the whole fucking name.
Yeah. And most of the characters in The Savage Detectives were stand-ins for people he really knew. He even made a character for Elisa Johnson, the girl who broke up with him like 15 years prior.
I mean, it must have fucking hit him pretty deep if he, like, moved to Europe afterwards.
She's kind of a bitch in the book, you know?
And she was mean.
She didn't get it, you know? He makes her kind of sound like a valley girl and that she just didn't understand, and shit. And she's just like, he's fucking stupid. And it was like, all right, man, I don't know. I feel like you're projecting quite a bit here.
It's like, you're not looking good, bud.
He's married now, has a son, doesn't matter.
I'm still mad about it. No, I'm just here with this stupid family.
Well, in 1999, Roberto Bolano released a novel called Amulet about the fictionalized account of a woman who calls herself the mother of Mexican poets and helped revolutionize Mexican literature in the 70s. Like he'd done before with Distant Star, Bolano expanded a portion of his last novel and created a whole new book based on it. Amulet was dedicated to Bolano's longtime friend and infrarealist co-founder Mario Papascaro. Mario died at the age of 44, after getting hit by a car in Mexico City, while Bolano was still writing Amulet in 1998. Oh. So there it was.
Oh.
Hit by a car.
Why didn't you know that?
I didn't remember.
You didn't remember?
I didn't have the one sentence memorized. I don't know. He's a side character. What am I supposed to do?
Whatever, man.
Well, feeling, I guess, a little more proud of his work than he felt 5 years ago, Roberto Bolano published a new collection of 16 poems in 2000 called Tres, though what I can find on the work is very limited, so, hey, maybe it was just okay. Though I feel a big reason this work was overlooked was probably because of his next work released the same year in 2000. By Night in Chile, though only technically a novella, being around 130 pages at most depending on the font size, is largely considered one of Roberto Bolano's greatest works. The story consists of the last thoughts of an old dying priest, retracing his life as everything from a man who taught Marxism to Pinochet and his generals, to learning falconry in Europe. And the story ends with the priest apologizing to himself for such a flawed life. Again, as short and sweet as this novella is, it got huge fucking recognition from critics the world over. It's just that Roberto didn't know about it. In 2002, Roberto Bolano released another novella called A Little Lumpen Novelita. But just like what happened the last time, this work was overshadowed by another book of his released that same year. In 2002, he released the first novel he ever wrote, the one he wrote back in 1980 called Antwerp, the one with all the little vignettes that somehow tie together. Mm-hmm. He said he may as well release it to the public because it was, quote, the only novel that doesn't embarrass me. But while he probably released Antwerp just for the hell of it, it completely overshadowed the novella he was actively trying to promote. A Little Lumpen Novelita was barely recognized and wasn't even translated until 2014, simply because no one was asking for this book. It's about a girl. That kind of seems to be it. Actually, there was an Italian film based on the novella made in 2013 called Il Futuro, but I don't know how much of it is actually based on Bolano's work. The movie is about a girl and a couple of guys trying to rob an old blind man, but I read the synopsis and it sounds way less exciting than Don't Breathe, which is about the same thing. So, yeah, just watch that. It's a good movie.
Okay.
Did you ever see the sequel?
No.
I wonder if it's fucking good. Well, anyway.
Jesus Christ, I'm not about to see much more. You're going to put me to sleep, Jordan. Will you please stop reading from the Wikipedia page?
Actually, pause it for a second. I need more beer.
Oh, okay. I mean, it's right there. Just grab it.
All right.
Oh, no. The professionalism here on Caleb Can Read. We can't record this process.
I wonder if we're allowed to say what beer we're drinking.
It's really funny. Do you think anyone would care?
I guess. Well, if anyone does care, it's not Tecate.
But I do wish we had limes.
I do wish that we had limes. Anyway, the final book that would be released during Roberto Bolano's lifetime was a collection of short stories called The Insufferable Gaucho, released in early 2003. Not much else to say about it. But this isn't the note that he would leave on. You see, while he wouldn't live to see the release of his next book, the news of his death caused its book sales to skyrocket, and besides The Savage Detectives, is often seen as his magnum opus. Now, no one's really sure when Bolano started writing his final novel, called 2666, but we know what the catalyst for him was to start. Between 1993 and 2005, more than 370 women had been killed in a single town close to the U.S.-Mexican border called Ciudad Juarez. A lot of the deaths are attributed to sex trafficking, yes, but a lot more surprising is that a large portion of these women are just rural farm girls coming to the city for work, being put into illegal sweatshops called maquiladoras, and dumped when they get worked to death. And has anyone really ever gotten caught for doing this shit? Not really. There was like one Egyptian guy that the police tried to pin all the murders on, but everyone knew that was bullshit. Well, one of Roberto's friends, a man named Sergio Gonzalez Rodriguez, had just finished an essay about the deaths called Bones in the Desert and sent it to Roberto, who at some point was inspired to write a story of his own. Now, Roberto experienced some major health issues in the middle of writing 2666. Turned out it was liver failure. He signed up for a transplant while he and his family could do nothing but hope for the best. Sometime in early June of 2003, Roberto Bolano went to a literary conference in Seville, Spain, for Latin American writers. And surprisingly to him, everyone knew who he was, not just as a writer, but as an inspiration to all of them. In fact, people giving lectures and speeches during the conference would call him out during their time on stage and talk about what a positive influence he'd been to the entire Latin American community. And he had no idea. I mean, hell, he'd only done like 3 interviews in his entire life, so he always kind of figured he was second rate. But the celebration of his work wouldn't last long before it changed into a celebration of his life. 4 weeks after the conference in Seville on July 1st, 2003, Roberto Bolano was hospitalized at the Vall d'Hebron University Hospital in Barcelona.
Did they have a liver?
No, actually. 2 weeks later, on July 15th, 2003, he died at the age of 50. Unfortunately, though a hugely successful writer without vice, his death was reported in America as a heroin overdose, though that was a weird, unsubstantiated rumor. According to Roberto's widow, this has been a specific problem in America where the people seem to romanticize the idea of a tortured artist and see heroism in every flaw, when in reality, Roberto Bolano was a pretty normal-ass dude. The rumor started from an old short story that Roberto had written about a heroin addict, and since everything in his stories seemed to blend fiction and autobiography, people just kind of assumed he was supposed to be the heroin addict in his story. But he never did heroin. In his final interview with the Spanish edition of Playboy magazine...
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, don't touch the heroin.
I think he was smart enough not to do that.
There's really only one rule.
Just don't do heroin?
Just don't touch the heroin.
Don't touch it?
Just don't.
What if I touch it a little bit?
Don't.
Pinky?
There's no little bit.
How much is too much heroin?
Don't touch that. Don't. Just don't. Just don't.
What if it's free heroin?
Nope. What is the true cost of the heroin? Down the line.
What is the true cost of life? I'm sorry. I fucking love that show.
What the fuck?
Chernobyl.
Oh, okay.
Well, time to watch that again. Anyway, in his final interview with the Spanish edition of Playboy magazine, posted posthumously on July 23rd, a week after his death, Roberto was asked what he considered himself as. He was born in Chile, grew up in Mexico, and lived the last 2 decades of his life in Spain. So was he a Chilean writer? A Mexican one? Spanish? He thought for a moment and simply said that he was Latin American, and that his country is his wife and 2 children. Which, by the way, yeah, he got a daughter at some point named Alexandra, but I don't know when. Anyway, 2666 was released in 2004. It's split into 5 parts. The first part is called The Part About the Critics. The story begins with 4 literary critics meeting during a conference in France. And while they don't seem to have much in common, the one thing that bonds them together is their shared love over a mysterious German writer with an Italian name named Benno von Arcemboldi. And as praised as his works are, nothing of his life is known. People can really only go off of the numerous titles he's put out, such as a book about seaweed, or a novel that was actually attributed to him 6 years prior in The Savage Detectives. In fact, it's believed that even Arcemboldi's name is a pseudonym for someone else. Well, the 4 critics get a lead on tracking Arcemboldi down, specifically to the fictional town of Santa Teresa in Mexico. If you'll remember, this is the place that Juan Garcia and Lupe moved to at the end of The Savage Detectives. And although the critics managed to find a couple leads, their search ultimately ends with nothing. And that's really the whole of the first part. And honestly, it made me stop reading as soon as I picked it up the first time around. Like, the cover looks metal, and the back says it's about all these murders, but then you read it and nothing's going on. It's like, what the fuck is going on? I got duped. But years later, on January 1st of this year, in fact, I decided to give the book another go. and it made a lot more sense the second time around. This first part doesn't establish the book's characters like I'd assumed before. It's introducing us to the world in which the story takes place. And when you view the first part of the book like that, it makes it much more interesting. I mean, it's still wonderfully written, and there's plenty of character development, but to me, it didn't feel like they were really the focus as much as the town of Santa Teresa was. For instance, here's this part that I really love. It's a phone call between two of the critics. Quote, "The first 20 minutes were tragic in tone, with the word fate used 10 times and the word friendship 24 times. Liz Norton's name was spoken 50 times, 9 of them in vain. The word Paris was said 7 times, Madrid 8. The word love was spoken twice, once by each man. The word horror was spoken 6 times and the word happiness once by Espinosa. The word solution was said 12 times. It's shit like that where you get what their conversation is about, but you don't need to hear every bit of dialogue because the story's not even about them. Anyway, the story of 2666 really begins with the second part of the book after the setting is established, called The Part About Amalfitano. Oscar Amalfitano is a professor who's recently moved to Santa Teresa with his teenage daughter, Rosa. Amalfitano knows this town is dangerous, especially for his daughter, and we're not actually given any insight as to why he felt it necessary to move there. This is as much as we're told about the decision. Quote, "I don't know what I'm doing in Santa Teresa," Amalfitano said to himself after he'd been living in the city for a week. "Don't you? Don't you really?" he asked himself. "Really, I don't," he said to himself. And that was as eloquent as he could be. That's it. Amalfitano's wife, Lola. Because it's not important, but we'll say it anyway. Come on, it's good. It's good shit.
Killing me here.
I told you he's fucking pretentious. Amalfitano's wife, Lola, left with a friend years ago, back when their daughter, Rosa, was like 2, to go search for a poet she was a fan of. But over the years, her search has led her all over the world. She keeps a one-sided correspondence with her family every so often, letting them know that she's now in Greece or Paris or wherever. So to keep his mind from wandering to fretful thoughts, Amalfitano begins burying himself in his studies. One day he comes across a book that apparently he owns, but has no recollection of ever seeing before. It's called The Babadook. No, it's a book of mystic geometry called Testamento Geometrico.
Oh, thank God. For a second there, I thought you were going to say something interesting.
And within its pages is some sort of puzzle that Amalfitano feels he's close to solving. But every day he starts going a little more mad, trying to figure out what it is. He starts tying up clotheslines and tearing out the pages of the book and rearranging the pages in the air, but he still can't figure it out. And during this bout of madness, he begins hearing...
Maybe I should have thought this through before I split them all up.
This book is fucking rare,
now I'm going to have to put them all back together again and then really structure all this. And
well, eventually, he starts to hear his father's voice, like, "You've also thought about your daughter and about the murders committed daily in the city, but you haven't thought seriously about whether your hand is really a hand. If you had thought about it, you'd be dancing to the tune of a different piper." And then Amalfitano starts having visions like, quote, "purple skies the color of an Indian woman beaten to death."
Oh, did he have a voice of a real person telling him to go to a hospital?
"Don't listen to me. Just flush the medication."
"Stop taking it suddenly."
"Your doctors are lying to you."
"I'm a real doctor."
Well, and that's just where the second part ends, too. And the third part of the story is called The Part About Fate, where we follow an American journalist named Oscar Fate. Get it? Huh? Part about fate. He's in Santa Teresa to cover a boxing match. And while he's there, he gets friendly with a Mexican journalist who's like, "Hey, you know what this place is known for? Dead women." And this guy tells Oscar...
Cool.
This guy tells Oscar about all these murders going on in the city. And Oscar gets super interested and decides to call his editor, asking if he can cover the story. But the editor's like, "Dude, you're there to cover a boxing match. Nobody cares about Mexican problems." But Oscar still decides to pursue the case. He meets up with this female journalist named Guadalupe that starts filling him in on the finer details of the situation, including the arrest of a German suspect named Klaus Haas that she says she's going to interview, and he's welcome to come along. In a spot of coincidence, Oscar Fate meets Oscar Amalfitano and his daughter Rosa, and Amalfitano begs Oscar Fate to take Rosa with him when he returns to America, and he agrees. But first, he, Rosa, and Guadalupe go to the prison to interview Klaus Haas. Now, the fourth part of the book, the part about the crimes, details every femicide in Santa Teresa, all 112, from the years in 1993 to 1997. It almost works like what Bolano did in Nazi literature in the Americas. It's an insane and disturbing read. Even though these murders are fake, they're real enough. It goes over 280 pages of how they were murdered and how they were found. It's extremely desensitizing to know this is how people in Ciudad Juarez must feel in real life. But just like a lot of things in the book, there are several loose ends in this part, just like all the others. Like, you can tell there are some connections from one murder to the next, but they don't connect on others. It's extremely frustrating because it feels like you almost have an answer. And then by the end of the chapter, you just find out that there was no answer at all. And what's funny is that you kind of see the police feel the same way, who, after a while, largely ignore trying to solve the problem altogether. For instance, quote, "The year 1995 began with the discovery, on January 5th, of another dead woman. This time it was a skeleton shallowly buried in a field belonging to the Hijos de Morelos farming cooperative. The farm workers who dug it up didn't know it was a woman. They assumed it was a small man. There were no clothes or anything buried with the skeleton that might have helped identify the remains. The cooperative alerted the police, who showed up 6 hours later." And although many suspects are interviewed...
So it's just totally normalized at this point.
Yeah, which honestly, that's what it sounds like it was for Ciudad Juarez in real life. You know, all those dead women, and they're just like, we're never going to catch the guy, right? So they just, fuck it,
I have other things going on.
I got to be there for the drug drop-off that I'm a part of,
I know. This is literally my job, but that's a lot of work.
That's so much work.
God damn, I just want to get my goddamn pension and go home. Like, come on,
goes hard enough,
Jesus.
And although many suspects are interviewed, the police find it easier to pin just the crimes on a German man named Klaus Haas, rather than investigate anyone else.
Oh, yeah, sure. That sounds evil.
Yeah. Well, plus, he's a foreigner. Makes it easier.
Boom.
Well, and that's what happened to that Egyptian guy in real life, too. The last half of this, but although it does sound like he did probably murder a couple people, he didn't murder like 300, though.
He didn't murder all of them.
Well, but no, yeah.
It's not okay for you to take out all the rage on me.
As soon as they arrested that guy in real life, though, they were just like, "Oh, our job is done," and everyone's like, "No,
our job is done. We're going home."
I said, "Dunsies, don't put the file away." I'm putting it away.
No takebacks.
Don't do it. The last half of this part does go through a bit of Klaus's experience in prison, which is horrifying, especially the people he's pent up with. Like, there's these two prisoners that are like in a rape war with each other, but you kind of get the idea that they're both kind of secretly into it,
what's
too.
happening?
Two of the prisoners that he's like pent up with in the prison, two of the prisoners are kind of like in a rape war, but like you could kind of tell.
Rape war?
Yeah, like, I'm going to rape you. And then like after a while, it's just like, they're just kind of like, hey, I'm going to rape you. And he's like, oh no, and they just kind of seem to get into it after a while.
I fucking hate this, man.
Yeah, it's terrible.
I don't even know how to approach that, to be completely honest.
By not reading it.
Okay.
The final part of 2666 is part 5, the part about Arkham Boldy.
Yeah, no, there's no appropriate way to approach that.
No, not really.
This is problematic at every corner. Like,
yeah. It's just...
No.
Well, don't talk about getting cornered.
Oh, whoa.
The last section of the book is the biography of the German writer that the critics were trying to find from part 1, though it turns out that his real name is Hans Reiter. He ended up changing his name after World War II, because although he was enlisted in the German army, he killed an officer when he found out he was responsible for killing Jews. Not wanting his identity found, he changed his name to Benno von Archamboldi. And while there's a lot...
Hey, wait a minute, you guys are killing Jews?
To be fair, they did a lot... Hey, look, we've been over this. I'm not saying any of them were good people.
Einer min Benuta.
Well, there's a lot that happens in this final section of the book. I'm pretty much going to skip right over it because it's an entirely different story from the rest. But basically, it turns out that in the present, Arcamboldi is alive and well, albeit old. And the suspect for all the killings in Santa Teresa, Klaus Haas, is actually his nephew. The book ends with Arcamboldi on his way to see his nephew in prison. And that's kind of it. However, when Roberto Bolano finished the book, he left an endnote on the last page for his editor to find, saying, quote, "And that's it, friends. I've done it all. I've lived it all. If I had the strength, I'd cry. I bid you all goodbye." And then he signed his name, Arturo Bolano. Now, the first question that most people have about the novel after finishing it is, why the fuck was it called 2666? As a matter of fact, the title of the book is...
Because putting 666 is sick as fuck.
The title of the book isn't even mentioned in this novel, but in a completely different book of Roberto Bolano's altogether. It's mentioned in his 1999 book, Amulet, the one that's a biography of the mother of all Mexican poets. It has this one part that she describes the city of Guerrero. She says, quote, "Guerrero, at that time of night, is more like a cemetery than an avenue. Not a cemetery in 1974 or in 1968 or 1975, but a cemetery in the year 2666, a forgotten cemetery under the eyelid of a corpse or an unborn child." And similarly, since Amulet was just a reworking of her character's life in The Savage Detectives, she says in that book to have, quote, "named a date sometime around the year 2600, 2600 something. So Bolano gave his next major work a shout-out 6 years prior to it actually coming out. But what one critic theorized is that biblically, the exodus of the Jews from Egypt supposedly happened 2,666 years after the creation of the earth. And Bolano could be saying that...
Who the fuck put the date on the creation of the earth? Get the fuck out of here.
Bolano could be saying that due to the fucked up state of Ciudad Juarez, people should make an exodus out of there. Might be a stretch, but I do like that theory. Now, unfortunately, although 2666 is highly regarded as an instant classic, the book was not in the kind of state that Roberto Bolano would have called complete when he died. He said that over 1,000 pages still had to be revised. And was that an exaggeration? Probably, since the book was only a little over 1,000 pages long in its original Spanish to begin with. Or maybe he meant the whole thing still had to be revised. Who knows? But either way, the book itself was originally supposed to be printed in 1 volume. But after finding out he was close to death, Bolano said it should be in 5 volumes, each part getting its own book, because in his head, more books meant more income royalties for his family. But eventually, his own family convinced him to keep it at just 1 volume. Probably the right call. But God, I wish Bolano could be alive to see the godlike status he got after 2666's release. Every critic loved it. Hipsters loved it. Every reader that's not pretentious hated it. It's exactly what he would have wanted. And I believe this was the first Bolano book that actually got translated to English. Even after all this praise he got for decades, it ended up being his last book that got translated first. And everything of his has been steadily getting translated into English since then. We've just been playing catch-up for the last 20 years in America. And he's been winning all of these posthumous awards for work he wrote like 30 years ago, as if it came out yesterday because of it.
Cool. Does his family get any money?
I mean, the royalties. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Oh, there's that at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In 2007, there was a regular, probably 2 or 3 hour performance of 2666 on stage. And then in 2016, there was a 5-hour adaptation on stage. And later that same year...
Oh, they made it a play?
And later that year, there was an 11-hour adaptation on stage.
Woo!
Who ain't going to go shit in the bathroom? Me, this guy. I'm pooping in my chair. All right.
They had intermissions, you mongol.
How many would they need? Usually an intermission is 1, you know? So they'd have to get it like 5 or 6 hours in. Fuck.
I don't know. Just have several. Make a day of it.
You have to.
Yeah, totally. Or you're just shitting your pants.
Yeah, I just say bring a bedpan.
You can't go 11 hours without shitting.
Well, anyway.
I feel like, you know, look, we're all adults here.
It depends on what I ate.
Okay, it don't work the same way as it did when we were younger. Yeah, but if you planned it out and you were eating well for like a week prior, I feel like you could sit
for
through
a week prior.
You
Yeah,
know,
it's true. This
just-
is a play that you would have to like work up towards.
I
Like,
feel
you're
like
not going to go day
if I
of,
brought like an
you
empty
know,
gallon jug, I'm not going to fill that up in 11 hours of just piss. You know,
of just piss.
Of just
that's why I
piss.
brought the funnel. Yeah.
no, and then fucking good luck, fucking what do you call it again? Waffle stomping that down. No, none of that. No. That's why we're eating right before. We're not shitting for 11 hours. Let's go.
God, fuck.
Yeah.
It sounds like hell. And Roberto
Try not
Bolano's...
having a bathroom for 10 hours a day.
You still go to the bathroom, though. That's the thing I know about you.
I said, try not.
And Roberto Bolano's longtime editor, Ignacio Perez, has long been rumored to be the executor of Roberto's literary estate, but his family has denied this again and again. I bring this guy up because it's clear to me that they were great friends, since Perez pulled the same kind of shit that Bolano would have fucking loved. Perez was one time doing a review for a book by this guy named Bernardo Exaga, and Perez just fucking tore this guy to shreds. But unfortunately, the newspaper Perez worked for owned the publishing house that printed Arteaga's novel, so he got fired over it. And of course, he started a huge fight in the newspapers, supported by a ton of authors. He still didn't get his job back, though. And although he published his works in quick succession and received praise for the few novels he produced, a pile of unfinished novels was found in Roberto Bolano's study in 2009. One of these books is supposedly called Diorama, but as of 2022, has yet to be released. But that hasn't stopped people from releasing around 10 different books of his after his death. From unreleased poetry collections to essays to short stories that he chose not to publish because he thought they were bad. But in 2010, Anagramma, the publishing house that printed everything of his since Distant Star, pushed out a novel called The Third Reich that Roberto Bolano wrote way back in 1989 and again decided not to release. It's actually about a board game called The Third Reich.
Ugh.
Honestly, what feels...
that got your attention, didn't it?
Honestly, what feels the most out of character for the book is that it's a little more than 350 pages long, and while yes, that's a normal length for anyone else, that's like double the length of a Roberto Bolano novel. I'm sure if he had oversight on it, he would have trimmed the fat, probably gotten it to like half that length. Apparently, while it is good, it's a book that Giles Harbvery of The New Yorker says, quote, should only join that shelf marked for completionists only. But released in 2011 was an actual unfinished novel of Bolano's, one he'd been working on since sometime in the 80s, according to his wife, and one that he was setting up to be his next novel after 2666 called Woes of the True Policeman. And this is what I mean when I say Bolano trims the fat. If we are to believe Bolano's wife about this, he'd been working on this book for around 20 years by the time he passed, but the book itself was only 256 pages when it was released. Meaning he went through several drafts and variations of plot, but only produced a small stack of what he considered finished product. And the publisher, Anagramma, doesn't act like this is a finished work, by the way. They're apparently very forward about only publishing what Bolano had accepted, which is great. And the novel itself seems to be a lot like his other works in a lot of ways, namely that it's from the perspective of multiple people, but again, since the work is unfinished, the entire plot really isn't there. No one has any idea where he could have been going with it. In 2013, a release of all of Roberto Bolano's poetry was made called The Unknown University. And in 2016, the precursor to The Savage Detectives, the work Bolano wrote back in 1984 called The Spirit of Science Fiction, was released to the utter joy of all completionists of his work. And like I said, even today, there's another novel coming out called Diorama, but honestly, it seems that anything Bolano didn't want to publish has subpar reviews. Probably why he didn't want these things published in the first place. So my recommendation going out of this would be to not believe the hype. If you want to get to know Roberto Bolano's style, then sure, read whatever you can. But if you're looking for something that's going to be as good as The Savage Detectives or 2666, it won't be in the things he chose not to publish himself. My sources today: Savage Detectives by Roberto Bolano, translated by Natasha Wimmer, Farrar, Straus, and Giroux. First Picador edition, April 2008. 2666 by Roberto Bolano, translated by Natasha Wimmer, Farrar, Straus, and Giroux, 2008. And Wikipedia. I want to say when he died, he was like 4th on the list. to get a liver transplant still. Like,
just a list.
Yeah, you gotta.
This is important to me.
Yeah, there's a list. You have to like. It's.
You have to be a good boy.
Pretty sure it's first come first serve.
Oh my god.
And it's like that regardless of what.
Can I mark it now and just be like, look, due to my drinking, I'm projecting that once I'm 40.
Honestly, I mean, you probably can.
Okay, cool.
But there's so few people out there that are organ donors, which is fucking stupid. I've heard that there's that age-old rumor that's like, if the paramedics see that you're an organ donor, they'll make sure they don't revive you. Because I want your organs. Yeah, and it's like, that actually does more damage to the organ.
The paramedics, the ones who do the organ transplanting, totally, they have the motive there. That makes sense. Because they get, tipped off by the organ putting on ice men. Like, what? Like,
hey, can you cut him open and take his organs? No, I'm an EMT. We literally don't do that. I have zero training.
No, I do not do. No, I keep you alive until you get to the dude.
I've also heard people say, like...
And then that's not even the dude for that.
I've heard people say like, no, I just, it's important to me. Like, I kind of want to be buried with all my parts. I'm like, you're not anyway. Like, they do remove your organs, put it in a little biohazard bag and toss it out back when you're dead.
Yeah.
Like, it's just that you did not check that you want to be a good person.
Yeah. That's why in my will, it's any functioning organs are to be harvested. And then the rest is to be fed into a wood chipper into the Horde Arboretum.
Yeah. Which I'm still, I mean, hey, I got your back.
Actually,
I got your back.
Very excited for that. We're going to do a demonstration on what happens when your climb line gets fed into a chipper.
Are you going to be
Absolutely. And dead and not giving a fuck. Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God. I thought you guys would do it with like a mannequin or something.
Well, yeah, when you don't have somebody volunteering to do it with a dead body.
I'm so excited for you. I really hope somebody films this.
No. The only thing is, I think the only flaw with this plan is like, it's gonna have to get cleaned up out of the wood chipper.
Oh, the line?
And that's gonna be really...
That's
no,
what?
Like, the line in my body.
Well, yeah. I mean, the body is... Yeah, anything stringy is gonna suck, honestly.
Dude, like, it's gonna be a bunch of nasty, mucky shit. Like, you can't just, like, feed stuff through it and, like, expect it to get cleaned up. Also, it's a biohazard issue, like...
Yeah.
So, that could be really expensive. And I could see them just, like, nodding
Still
to
don't
me.
know if you're talking about if you get fed into it or just your line.
No. I'm attached to the line in this scenario.
Okay.
So, like, God damn it. Should we pop?
No, it's
we
fine.
Can edit. Okay, so so the thing is, organ donor, yeah. So all the organs are out, right? And then after that, instead of just using a dummy to show how quick you can throw someone into a wood chipper via their line that's attached to them,
we're going to show you what happened with Caleb
with a whole ass dead body. So it scares the shit out of them, and they never do it.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's going to happen once.
Yeah. And then I just get picked apart by raccoons and crows.
Yeah.
Slowly distributed across the landscape.
How Buddhist, honestly. Sky burial, except it's wood chipper burial.
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
Just somebody jamming me in with a fucking end of, like, a fucking rake.
Oh, trust me. I've seen Fargo before. I can do this.
Ah, shit. That's why it looks like that in Fargo. It's not meant for that.
I know.
It's too gummy.